we'll go ahead and get started. The task at hand is to take our retro Amazon backend and make our users persist their logins. Right now, it is kind of hard to see, but because we don't really have a real front end, but if a user were to log in and then close their browser and then go back to their browser, they would be logged out. So we want to give the user the option to quote unquote remember me. Okay, and basically the two things that we're going to bring in to do that are cookies and JSON web tokens. Right? Cookies are going to help us create our sessions, and then JSON web tokens are going to basically help us store the information in a secure way that cookies just can't do very inherently. Built into the cookie is not a lot of security because they are stored on the client, stored on the front end. And so probably before I boot this up, we want to go ahead and install those packages. And so I will pull up the lecture notes, of course, that I just closed. And I'm on Inside Rankin that is requiring me to authenticate every time I close my browser. A little bit of annoying. However, every website does that differently. So if I pull up the authentication lecture notes, there's really two packages that we need to bring in, which is cookie parser and JSON web tokens. So maybe we just start with npm and look up cookie parser, npmjs.com, cookie parser. And so you can see, I don't know, 3 million of anything in a week. That's a lot. So this will allow you to read cookie headers and create cookies with an object keyed by the cookie names. So you know we're going to bring in cookie parser at the top of our server. And then we talked about the secret and the options. And so then they give some example of using cookie parser. This is again middleware, so we'll do an app.use cookie parser. And so this is basically how we're going to get that started and set up. Up here, npm I cookie parser. This is the command that we'll use over here. So let's go ahead and start by installing cookie parser. And now on my dependencies, I have cookie-parser. And I can bring this in as a global middleware by importing it up at the top. And so here's all of our imports. I'll just bring it in here on line 11. Import cookie parser from cookie parser. And then we need to, just like we instantiate our Express app, we install our middleware here. We need to add the app.use cookie parser that we just got done looking at. Bless you. And I don't know app.use. We call cookie parser function. And this is the line that I'm going to write, but I'm kind of curious if I do app.use. I'm kind of curious what that. Oh, they bring in the cookie secret this way inside of. We bring it in another way. Cookie parser. The cookie secret is like a recipe, yes. Yes. Okay. So this will allow us to create cookies. The other dependency is JSON Web Token. And again, scrolling through the notes, here's the package, npm install one word JSON Web Token. npm I JSON Web Token. This will allow us, again, I'm just repeating myself, hopefully it helps. This will allow us to secure the payload inside of the cookie, right? So you create the web token contains the authentication token, and we store that inside of a cookie. npm I JSON Web Token. Now, this is all dealing with our login system. And so anytime a user logs in, we're going to give them an authentication token. And so we're going to be modifying this login route. So if you open up users.js, but also when we think about adding a new user, when you add a new user, I would think your assumption would be that the user should automatically be logged in, right? If you register, and I've used websites, I'm sure you have too. You register for an account and then you have to log in, or when you register for an account, you're automatically logged in, right? There's no right or wrong, but I would argue that if you register for an account, you should automatically be logged in, right? I've definitely seen it both ways. So when we're adding a user, we should keep them logged in, or if we're logging in a user, we'll keep them logged in. So maybe we start with the add route. Here we're getting a new user from rec.body. We're taking that user's password and we're hashing it, right? So we've been through this. We call the add user database function, pass it our new user object, and if there's no errors, we just basically say user added. Okay. I'm just going to refactor this a little bit, so if you're following along, my new user I'm going to call new ID. Let me open up my database module, see if I've got that new ID function written in here. So let me look at my database functions. Okay. I need to write this new ID. I think you guys have written this in already at some point. But let me write this const new ID, input a string, and return new object ID with that string. Simple arrow function, one input, one return. And then I need to export new ID down here. And what that allows me to do is import new ID right here. Yeah, so up top, the function's right here. Sure thing. Again, go ahead and export it. Excuse me. And import it over here on the user.js. All this really does is it allows us to store the user's underscore ID by generating it on the fly right here. So this will generate an object ID. And now we have access to the object ID. Then we'll go ahead and spread rec.body. And we'll add a created date. And you guys have done something similar. Then this will update the password with our hash. Now this result, I'm going to put an if statement around this. I'll say if result dot acknowledge. Let me see what comes back. Let me see what I send back from add user. So if I go here, database, add user. Yeah, so this we're saying, hey, the role is customer, insert. So I believe we can add an if statement. If the result has acknowledged, you could say is true. Then we send a status of 200. Okay, but before we send this back, now this, what have we done here, right? You know, we're now ready to create the cookie and JWT token. Right, we've basically said that, hey, we're getting a success from our client. Let me go ahead and boot this up. npm run start dev. It looks like we're on port 3003. And let me save all this and close all my old routes down here. Okay, get out of the hands-on test. We're back into the retro Amazon users, add new user. Okay, so this is posting to 3003 API users add. I click send and it does say user added. If I go back to my list all users route, I don't have that implemented. So we're gonna have to implement that, which is something you guys know how to do at this point. So if I go back to my database, we got get books. There's my add user, there's my login user, async function, get all users. Connect to my database, hit the user collection, find to array, return my users. Let me make sure that my collection is capital U and singular. pull this over here, connect to check it out. It is user singular, and now I need to export this function. Get all users and import it over here. So async that function so we can await get all users, res.send, try catch, thank you, try this, send back my error message if I get it, and if I just send status 200, JSON, thank you. .json. Okay. So now we're getting our users back, and there's our Don Poll user. Has a created date now. He has a hashed password, email, full name. Okay, so that's cool. I'm just gonna delete that record from Mongo because I'll use him as my sample data today. So if I go to list my users again, I just took them out. But now that we've added a new user, and it does this result.inserted ID sends the object ID across, as we saw back here. This was the object ID that came back from the database. So I actually didn't have to do that because I could have used it inside of result. It would have sent that back. Yeah, you want to go back to here, inside of user, go back into list. There you go. Okay, so everyone following along so far so good. To get logins to persist, we need to create a JSON web token and store that token inside of a cookie. And we're going to write this code in its own function because we want it to be reusable. And so we will reuse these functions. And so let's go ahead and kind of at the top of our user.js, let's go ahead and write a little reusable function. And we could just do this above our joy. We'll make an async function called issue auth token. And we're going to send in a user object that we're creating the auth token for. We're going to have a payload. So again, kind of three parts. There's a header, a secret. There's a payload, there's a secret, and there are options. So here's kind of one thing. We're going to set a secret equal to something we'll store inside of our .env. So we're going to have a payload. We're going to store a secret inside of our .env, and we'll have our options. Const options equals and expires in 1 hour. Is as simple as that gets. So the payload is the data that we're storing inside of our auth token. So the auth token goes inside of the JSON web token. That's kind of the weird thing here. It's actually kind of anyways, so we're going to store the user's ID. Like, this is the relevant information that we'll have access to on the front end. Sure, this is good. So the payload will include the user's ID, the user's email, and whatever the array of roles that they have. Let's go ahead and create this JWT secret. So inside of my .env file, create a variable called JWT secret, and sure, super secret. Not best practice, right? Our best practice is to be, you know, long string here with characters and everything else.
But it's super secret. So.
But this is super secret. Don't need those. Okay, I'm refactoring this as I go. So we need to bring in JSON web token. And so up at the top, I'm going to import JWT from JSON web token. And I'm going to now create my const auth token. And this is the JWT sign passing the 3 inputs that we saw in the lecture. And this function sends back the auth token. Keep in mind that our payload would be encrypted, right? That's the whole idea behind using this JWT, is we're kind of not just storing our user ID and our user's email and our user's role in a plain text string inside of a cookie that could be edited. So this is to create our auth token. I'm going to make one more that'll create a cookie. Now, I don't have this as asynchronous. This is just a regular function, issue auth cookie. We're going to take in the response object and an auth token. Okay, we're going to say this cookie is HTTP only. True. Now this math right here, max age is, we understand the math behind this. 6,000 times 60 times 60 is 1 hour. And I'll leave it at that. Yep. Sure. Okay. You're welcome. So this creates the token and returns the token using JWT. This will create the cookie. The cookie has some options, basically that it expires in 1 hour, and we're sending the cookie via HTTP. And as we saw in the lecture, how to create the cookie is with res.cookie auth token. The information in the cookie is basically this right here, the auth token itself, and expire in 1 hour, right? 60 seconds, 1 hour. So in this case, our token, our JWT token expires in an hour, and our cookie expires in an hour. They're both expiring in 1 hour. Now, what that allows us to do, writing these two functions. How many people are still writing these two? No problem. We're going to use these functions, again, repetitively when we either log in a user or create a new user. So let's go back to where our adding a new user, as we were doing before, kind of working on this function. And we said, hey, if we put the new user in the database and we get a good acknowledgement from our database, now we can call these functions. Again, one of them is async, one is not. So I need to go ahead on my add route, make that async. It is. So let's call the first. Now keep in mind, let's break this line down, right? This function is asynchronous, so we have to await it. We send that function our user that we created right here, and it returns an auth token. So if the database add is good, we send our new user to our function, it returns an auth token. We then store that auth token in a cookie, and voila, you know, that's the theory of today. In order to store that in a cookie, this is not asynchronous, so we can just call our function. Our function is called issueAuthCookie. We send in the response object. Now, do we even end up using that? Let me go to that function. We do. We do use that to modify the response object to add a cookie, right? So here we're adding a property. Now, let's see that there's anything else that's what I need. Now I'm going to do one more thing here on our add new user. This says user ID added, and I'm just going to show you the auth token that was created, and I'll say user added period and I'll say your auth token is auth token. Now, keep in mind, this is just encrypted, right? This isn't going to add any like useful information for us, other than I just want to like see that an auth token was created. And then I'm going to show you something here on Postman. So this is the code that we needed for the add. Let's kind of go back here. I'm going to re-add Don Poll. So now it says user added, and it says your auth token is gibberish gibberish. Remember the three parts: the header, the payload, and the secret, right? Three different parts of our JWT token. And one more interesting thing here, if I click on cookies, I now see that I have an auth token cookie that is going to be sent to the client and expires on the 23rd at 1 hour GMT, whatever whatever the math is behind that. GMT, don't even know what that stands for. What is GMT?
Which mean time? GMT is, I think, like general mountain time.
General mountain time. It expires in an hour, based on what we told it. Okay. So when this is working, I'm verifying that the code that we're writing is working two different ways. Number one, we created our web token. And number two, we stored that web token right here in this cookie as verified here under manage cookies inside of Postman. Well, that's when we add a new user. Again, we're auto logging in the user. Does anyone need to see any part of this? Yep.
Can you go to your imports? I somehow messed that up.
Yeah, on the imports, we brought in JWT from JSON Web Token.
Hold it there for a minute.
After that, can I see the ad route?
Can you just...
After that, can you see what?
The ad route?
Sure. Tony, you good?
Mm-hmm.
All right, back to the add route.
All right, I got it.
Cool. Anyone else need to see anything? Now that we've added a new user, of course we need to add this to our login route. That's why we wrote these functions so that we can call them multiple times. So now we're going to say, okay, if we've got a user and we compare their passwords and we've got a good password, we're going to write the same 2 lines of code. We're going to issue an auth token for that user. And we're going to put that token inside of a cookie. And we'll welcome the user with their full name, and we'll also say, period, your auth token is auth token. Again, that's not really particularly useful information other than just to show that the auth token was created by JWT. And you could easily keep that out.
Did you import JWT?
Yeah, I imported JWT up at the top, line 9.
That was an npm dependency, right?
Yep. Yeah, we had to install it first. Okay, now let's go ahead and log Don Poll in, right? We've added Don Poll, dpoll@rankin.edu. If I go to login user, dpoll@rankin.edu. Let me first not give a valid user. It's barking about invalid email, so I'll say dpoll1. That should give me email or password incorrect. And if I say dpoll@rankin.edu, welcome Don Poll, your auth token is, it starts with EY and ends in 2G. If I go to cookies, I've got my auth token cookie starting in EY, ending in 2G, expiring in 1 hour. And I can delete that cookie, kind of go back, delete the cookie, but if I log back in again, it should recreate my auth token cookie. Yes, sir?
If you log in a different user, would it like overwrite that, or would you have to?
Yeah, it would. Yeah, so let me log in EA Gudmested at rankin.edu. My auth token is EY, ending in EM. Now my auth token EY EM.
Okay.
Yep.
It's not saving it yet, is it?
It's saving it in a cookie. That's where.
Okay.
That's where we're saving that auth token. And so really that's all you need. Now that you've got an auth token, now your client can keep you logged in. Okay? In fact, if I go to my Google Cloud, cloud.google.com, I go to my console and I look at my bug tracker, React. So here's my front end. And if I go to my dashboard, I might still be logged in here. See? Welcome back, EA Gudmested. It knows who I am, and because it knows who I am, I can get to these different sections. Although I would expect bugs, and I would expect users. So log out. Log in. So I found a new bug, but so here I am. It's probably something expired and I needed to log me back out after so much time. But so here's my React app. Okay, let me go ahead and close down my tab, open me back up. There you go. I'm still logged in and I can still get to my bugs. If I log out, close, reopen, I'm out. If I log in, my website remembers who I am. It's just a little bit easier to see when you actually have a front end to see it, right? And now I can log out and go back to my website and I'm still logged in. Right, so my auth token is persisting instead of just going away. And the way that's doing that ultimately is through a cookie and the web token inside of the cookie. Let me take a look at the lab and see if there's anything else I haven't covered that you'll need for the lab.
Could you push that real quick?
Yep. Okay, we're going to go ahead and continue a little bit.
You're welcome.
The next step, because I was looking ahead at the lab, 0401, and there's a few things I haven't talked about yet. Such as kind of denying access if the user's not logged in. So for example, right now we can list our books regardless of the user being logged in or not logged in. Like if I log in a user, but let's just say I go to books, go to list all my books, I don't have to be logged in to do this. And so you can begin to lock these routes down very basically. It can be more complex, but the 401, you're not authenticated. And so you could write your own middleware method to do that and check to see if a user is logged in. And in a lot of cases, when you write middleware, if we kind of go back to like a middleware that we wrote, remember that middleware has access to the request object. And you can add properties, like if I go to valid ID maybe, notice right here, we're actually adding a property to a request object. And, so we're adding rec dot, whatever the ID is that we're sending in. And so we're modifying this request object with a new property. Like that's what middleware can do. Middleware can modify the request object and the response object. And so it is kind of common, I'm not going to write any code here, but rec dot auth is a property that could be used to determine if there's an auth token. And we could write our own middleware to do that. Kind of interested in just dabbling in that and trying that, because that's not the solution that I've used in the past. But we know how to read from our cookies. So could we write a function to read from our cookies and get that auth token out? Maybe. But maybe I hold that task for another day. Let me undo that. There is a package that we can use that really simplifies this process. This is a homegrown package, if you will, from Rankin. So this is the one package that I'm going to introduce. Again, it's you don't have to use it, but it is one package that is a Rankin solution that doesn't come from it doesn't have millions of downloads. And so this package, if you're following along, at Merlin 4 Express Auth. This is a package that's got a whopping 10 downloads a week. Again, because it's internal, it's not something that's out there. Again, you could use Passport, which is something way more popular, but this is something that's been kind of developed by instructors at Rankin, and it will allow us to create a rec.auth once we install some global middleware. So let me show you the process of using this package. Starts with an npm install. So let me bring my server down. And close what I'm not using. npm install at Merlin 4 / express -auth. Okay, so went ahead and brought in that dependency. And let's go open our server.js. What was the command? It's right there. Can you see it now? Now to use this middleware, we're going to import it. So on our server.js, we're going to install this as global middleware. Maybe on line 12 here, I'm going to import auth middleware from at merlin4 / express -auth. So this is a function that we're bringing in. This middleware function will create the rec.auth property that we were talking about. Okay, so to install this function, app.use, bless you, we're going to call auth middleware, and the first argument is my secret for my web token, so JWT secret. The next is the name of my token. We called it auth token. And the third are some options, which we said were HTTP only if true. And I think we said max age is this. Now the beauty of this is that this is going to go inside of the cookie that we created, I believe, and it should be able to access our auth token. From within that cookie. Okay, so
Can you explain what that line does again?
yeah, so when I was explaining kind of back here how on valid ID, right, this was a middleware that we actually modified the request object with a parameter that we got to name, like rec.userid, right? We added a property. And so I explained, hey, we could make a rec.auth property that has our auth token in it. And we could write our own middleware to do that. This middleware that we're installing, should look inside of our cookie that we created and generate that rec.auth for us to put the auth token in there, basically if that cookie is created.
Okay.
Okay? And so I'm gonna see if I can demonstrate that and show it a little bit better, okay? Because right now I know it's a little bit cloudy, okay? So let me back this up. Okay, so let me go back here, and right now, if I see here, I've got an auth token stored in a cookie, right? So I'm just gonna take that out, right? So we're not logged in here, and if I go to list all books, my server is not booted right now, so it's going to error out. Let me go ahead and boot my server and list the books. Okay, so nothing different about this. I want to, on my list books, if I go to my book and I go to my list, I'll take this debug book out right here, and I'm going to debug book and say the rec.auth property is need to make those backticks. Rec.auth. So I'm not logged in here. And if I go to list all my books, I get the books back, and it says the rec.auth property is undefined. And I would expect something to that extent because I'm not logged in. But if I log in my user, and now I go to list all books, now I can see rec.auth has something in it. So, Tony, I'm going to repeat your question, which is, can you explain what this does? This is middleware. Instead of us writing our own middleware, we brought in an authentication middleware for us that created a rec.auth that reads from our cookie. And if the user is authenticated, it puts something inside of rec.auth. Now let's see what it put in there. Right? So if I go back to book and I stringify this, and I go back to list my books, you could see what is in here. ID, email, enroll. What does that look like? That's our JWT payload. Right? If I go back to my user and my login route, and I look at what we put in the payload, the ID, the email, and the role. These three things right here that we call the payload object, that's what we're putting right here. The ID, email, and the role. It looks like there's some sort of expiration that it added to it. And IAT, not quite sure what IAT is, but we now have this rec.auth variable with some information in it. Let's do this. Now on our book.js, well, we could simply say if not rec.auth. We could do something like if not rec.auth. If you're not authorized, send back not authorized. Go ahead and return. So let's.
Is there a way we could do it like the valid ID middleware that we have set up where you don't?
You could write your own, yeah, and that's what I said at the beginning. It's like, we could go down that route. I know that this is some pre-built stuff, so we can use the pre-built stuff. We could write our own. Right now, I am logged in. Let me click to close that cookie, and let me try and list my books. And there I get the error not authorized. 401 unauthorized. Yeah, I put that on my list route before anything.
Okay. And the JSON on stringify, whatever you want to stringify would be within parentheses, right?
Yeah. Yeah, now if I am logged in, right? If I am logged in, so let's go back to login user, list all books. Go ahead and hit send. Now I'm logged in. Now I get access to the data.
Can we go back to that the authorization at the top of it?
Yep. Now, just out of here, this kind of code leads to, if you don't do the return, sometimes you can get that multiple headers are sent back. So let me log out. Let me log out essentially that way. Here, it still works. I'm not sure that you need that return statement, but it seems like a good thing to keep in. Now there's another way to write this. There's actually an easier way to write this. built into this dependency. This MERN, let's say import. It's not auth middleware, it's is logged in. And here, instead of writing it as such, we do is logged in, comma. This does the same thing, right? So if I come back here, I check out my cookies, I'm not logged in, I hit this, now I gotta put try catches and these kinds of things. Yeah, that was kind of ugly. But you get the same end result. You get an error message.
On the server page. Okay, no, I'm getting the same thing.
So let me go, now if I log in my user, we get access to the data.
It is logged in and then
Yeah, and
you did if is not logged in, right?
once you kind of bring in the auth middleware and you get access to the rec.auth, these are the functions that are useful. This time I think all we're looking at is logged in. But in our next lecture, we're going to start talking about like user roles and permissions, things of that nature. So we'll continue to use this. But yeah, here's your is logged in middleware. Bada bing, bada boom.
So did you just, can you just decode using this? Oh, it's literally just up there.
Yeah, it's literally just right here. Yep.
Are we gonna end up doing like a log out so it gets rid of the cookie or whatever? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we're actually a little bit further in the lecture than, I actually thought we would get. So I'm gonna kind of stop today. It's been a long day. You guys have enough, for 25 minutes to kind of start on the next lab. You guys can go ahead and get a start. We've got more to lecture on today and tomorrow are theory days. Okay, so I'll go ahead and stop here.